Hello, Dr. Peterson. So I've been listening back to all of these biblical lectures for the second time now, and I wanted to show you an observation I came upon, because I was trying to find a question that you haven't been asked before, which is harder than doing my Ryerson exams, that's for sure. So I've noticed, I think you're getting funnier.
Oh, yes. Oh, no, I think Michael Corrin said that this week, I think, but the word he used was bizarre, I think. Yeah. Actually, I'm feeling better, so I actually have a sense of humor. It's hard to believe that, but so it sort of comes back when I'm not feeling like I'm going to die at any moment, so.
Yeah, I've basically noticed, one, you're making more attempts at jokes, so that's great.
Well, thank you.
Two, those jokes are landing more often, right? But then there's this third element, which I think was what Steve Martin quit because of, which is that I think the audience is anticipating jokes more, and they're actually, I've noticed people laughing more at things that aren't intending to be jokes. So I was just wondering what you make of that, and
They're intended. I'm hoping they're intended. Just because I keep a straight face doesn't mean they're not intended to be jokes. So, yeah. No, it's good. Look, one of the things is like and I've tried to keep this, I learned a while ago, probably about 5 years ago, that even when you're dealing with really serious matters, that if you're not handling it with a light touch, you're not an expert at it. You're not a master at it. And you think, well, there are some things that are so deep and dark that you can't handle them with a light touch. And that's actually not true. That doesn't mean you make light of them. It doesn't mean anything like that. It's that you don't, it's minimal necessary force. It's something like that. You don't hit it any harder than you have to. And it's an art when you're discussing serious matters. And so, well, one of the upshots of that is that because we're discussing serious matters and because serious matters are being discussed in the culture at large right now, it would be really good if everybody could keep their sense of humor. You know, and I see positive signs of that, like there's a lot of satirical activity on the net, and that could easily catalyze into horror mob, but it isn't. It is, that's happening to some degree, but a lot of it's satire and comedy, and as long as we can keep a sense of humor about this, then I think, well, we're not as close to disaster as we might be. And so one of the things that I have found rather ominous is that there are comedians, first of all, being persecuted under free speech restriction legislation, which I think is absolutely appalling, but also that there are comedians now who won't perform on university campuses. John Cleese won't. Seinfeld, it's like, well, you know how offensive he is. It's no wonder that, I mean, he's like the straightest, nicest comedian you could possibly imagine. He won't perform on college campuses. I think Louis C.K. won't perform on, or anywhere else for that matter. But it's a bad sign. But no, humor is good. And it's interesting because I've been kind of watching how I'm represented on the web, weirdly enough. And there's all these memes that have emerged. I don't know, thousands of the bloody things. And most of them are comical. And that's good. Like, people they're whatever it is that they're doing, I don't know what the hell it is, but it's being done with a relatively light touch, and that's really, really good. That's how it should be. You got to have a sense of humor. I mean, it's one of the things that makes life bearable. So, or maybe even better than bearable. So, you bet.
I've been struggling with an idea recently that I was thinking maybe you'd be able to help me out with. Basically, in a recent interview, you talked about how myth is meant to reconcile inherent contradictions in reality, right? But I'm sort of stuck between two mythological or psychoanalytic ideas that I think are both really important, but they seem to have an inherent contradiction within them that I've been trying to figure out. So on one hand, you have this idea that there's times in your life where you have to identify things in yourself that are insufficient, or there's a problem somehow that you have to kind of have a controlled burn, or like a phoenix-like transformation where you discard part of yourself that doesn't fit or is not working. But then on the other hand, you have talked about this Jungian idea where as you become really, when you get older, you mature by reincorporating things about yourself that you lost when you were younger, or that you're trying to integrate your shadow, or you're trying to find parts of your personality that that maybe you've been rejecting and try and figure out how to bring them into the fold or into the whole. So he's got this quote that I really like, which is, "I'd rather be whole than good."
Right, right.
So on one hand, you may identify something as a problem and you want to get rid of it or burn it off. But then on the other hand, it seems like the path to being stronger is to figure out how to put everything together.
So one of the things Jung wrote about in his works on alchemy was an explanation of the prime alchemical dictum, which was solve coagula, which meant dissolve and integrate. Right. So imagine this. So imagine you had a fairly hostile father who was not very well controlled in his aggression. Decent person other than that, but let's say that. And so your reaction is, I'm never going to be aggressive. And so you've built a moral structure that's part of your personality. And there's possibility floating around outside of that you've denied any ethical, what would you say? You've stripped the idea of aggression of any ethical utility whatsoever. Okay, so what happens? This burns off, and then that comes back up. Now you still have to integrate it. So it's associated in some sense with Nietzsche's idea as morality as cowardice. Because one of Nietzsche's most trenchant critiques of traditional morality, let's say, is that most of what passes for morality isn't morality. It's just cowardice. It's not that I'm a good person and I don't hurt you. It's that I'm afraid to hurt you. And because I don't want to admit that I'm afraid to hurt you, then I say I'm moral, because then I can mask my essential fear and cowardice in a guise of morality. And that happens far more often than you would think, because harmless and moral are by no means the same thing. So some of what you're burning off, you can sit, and this is where Freud was such a genius, said that the hypersimplified morality stops you from tapping into deeper recesses of your psyche. And it's partly because they're primal forces. It's not surprising that you don't want to have anything to do with them, that you stay away from situations where they might make themselves manifest. But the problem is, by denying the worst in yourself in that manner, suppressing it, you preclude the possibility of the best. Because no one can be a good person without integrating their capacity for aggression. Because without that capacity for aggression, you cannot say no. Because no means, if you really say it, no means there isn't anything that you can do to me that will make me change my mind. Or conversely, it means I will play for higher stakes than you will. And unless you've got your aggression integrated, there isn't a chance you can say that. And if you did, no one would take you seriously, because they'd know it was just a show. So one of the most useful things that Jung did, I think, was to work on this idea of the integration of the shadow. What do you do with the part of you that's aggressive and potentially malevolent? Do you just crush it? That's the superego response in some sense. Do you just put it behind you, so to speak? Is that a possibility? Or do you admit to its existence and bring it into the game? And that's, see, for Freud, in some sense, morality was superego clamping down on the id. And they were fundamentally opposed. Both Jung and Piaget had a different idea, and I think they were right. It's like, no, you invite the bad guys out to play. And so you're an aggressive hockey player, but it's disciplined aggression. That gives you access to a whole sorts of energy you wouldn't otherwise have. You burn off the things that get in the way of that integration.
So when you say dissolve and integrate, might it be a good way to sort of bring the two ideas together, that the burning off and the difficult process is necessary because the elements of yourself are structured together in a rigid way that is not working properly. And
that's what happens to Geppetto in the belly of the whale. He's so caught in his presuppositions that he can't escape, right? And so Pinocchio represents the new force. So it's very interesting. So when you watch Pinocchio try to rescue him, the first thing Geppetto does is confuse Pinocchio with a fish because he wants something to eat. But Pinocchio is better than something to eat because he can rescue him so he doesn't need to eat. And then Pinocchio wants to make a fire and Geppetto objects because he's going to burn up all the furniture. It's like, We don't need the damn furniture if we're getting out of the whale, you know? And so Geppetto, and he's old, so that's the rigid structure. That's the old year that has to die off before the new year can be born. It's a forest fire that allows for new growth, and that's how those things are put together. And see, and it's useful to know too, because if you burn something off, you might think, well, there's nothing left. It's like, that's not true. If it's dead wood, then you have room for new growth. And you want to be doing that on a fairly regular basis. That's the snake that sheds its skin and transforms itself, right? That's the death and resurrection from a psychological perspective. It's exactly the same idea. Now, we don't know the upper limit to that, right? Because we don't know what a person would be like if they let everything that they could let go, and only let in what was seemly, let's say. But you can see that. It's funny. We don't know that to some degree. You can see people start to do that without, that's not a rare experience. And people improve very rapidly. They can improve their lives very rapidly. A lot of it's low-hanging fruit. Like, if you just stop doing really stupid things that you know are stupid, your life improves a lot. So, and it frees you up. It also means there's an element there that's also associated with pride. Because people tend to take pride in who they are. And that's a bad idea, because that stops you from becoming who you could be. Because if you're proud of who you are, you won't let that go when it's necessary. You won't step away from it. You know, and then you end up being your own parody, something like that. That's also a very bad idea. You want to be continually stepping away from your previous self. And so, and I guess part of that too is that you have to decide, you know, are you order? Are you chaos? Or are you the process that mediates between them? And if you're the process that mediates between them, you are the thing that transforms. And that's the right attitude for a human being, because that's what we are. We're the thing that voluntarily confronts chaos and transforms. That's what we are. And so, for better or worse, you know, that's our deepest biological essence, you might say. And so you can let things go if you know that there's more growth to come.